Welcome back to our podcast, Front Runner Podcast. Today, we're talking again to Jovan. Jovan has been having a couple of conversations with us over the last little while on a number of different topics. And today, we're going to talk about the connection between universities and business, external entities that the university interacts with. And Jovan, when I look at the connection between business and universities, sometimes it's very isolated. Sometimes the university academic stream, the researchers are focused on what it is of interest to them and they get their ideas from the literature. Sometimes there is more of a connection between business and universities to the extent that schools of business sometimes drive the agendas of university research. And I'm hoping to get your thoughts on that today. So welcome to the program.
Hi, James. Thank you, and thanks for having me back. It is the interesting topic. Certainly, I have a kind of my own life experience that I have used on how relationship between universities and schools can be successful or not. So maybe a bit of context and a bit of background. I was working over 10 years in industry when I decided to start my own business. And at that time, I was in New York City, and without large investment, forget about having startup in New York. So after my research, I saw Canada is providing a lot of support for startups as well as the students. And I decided to get a master's degree at Concordia University in Montreal. And while studying, to get to know country, people, and really identify the opportunities. So right after graduation, I started my own business, and I continue working closely with the graduate students from both Concordia and McGill, and it was a very interesting experience because first few years we were mainly about the research and development, and really fit well with the university mandate. Through these 2.5 years, our work impacted about 18 graduate student theses. The team presented on 3 conferences. We also have a book published. And then right after product was launched and commercialization stage started, company needed a different set of skills. And people with experience, which students and were not really fitted well, they couldn't really provide. And but we continue working since then. So we're talking about 2003 when I came. Still, we're working, continue hiring students, fresh from the college and universities, and we working closely with several programs that are now available in Canada who are helping students to find the best fit. So it's a really interesting. I was kind of from one side student, and now as a kind of business owner, seeing that scope. And you mentioned about research. I mean, there are certain aspects of the business that certainly universities can bring and contribute more, but there are often areas that they lack skills or lack being kind of up to date with what they can offer. I saw another big growing effort to commercialize research in schools and to get into the hands of companies to take it to the market. And I don't see Canada doing a great job in this area. I think that it can do much better. Even Harvard Business Review report from I think a year ago mentioned that research at business schools is not very effective and relevant to businesses. Often businesses either ignores it or studies are done without any input from industry or from the market. So it is a growing problem, and I don't see a clear way to solve it.
Well, maybe part of that issue is that they really have different focuses. For example, if we think of the university environment, they're very much focused on the publishing of papers and the publishing of research and getting grants to do that research. That's the connection between gaining tenure, gaining promotions, is publications, research in elite journals. But business, on the other hand, has that profit motive. So they're looking for things that are enhancing their revenue or cutting costs, at the abstract level, which is a complete misalignment or disconnect. And I've had conversations with other people in the innovation world who have said, I've seen innovations that are really cool, for example, that could make great headway in terms of cancer as a potential, but the academic side is only interested in publishing the results. Once the results are published, then the chance of getting a patent on that greatly diminishes. So there's this dilemma on the academic side of, well, if I publish something, that gets me the tenure, that gets me maybe the promotion, but business, on the other hand, wants protectable intellectual property. That's the one stream on the innovation stream. On the graduate side, academia tends to be focused on producing people that can think and communicate and have high level knowledge and are able to apply it. But business may be more interested in practical skills, the ability for somebody to come directly into the organization and start working right away on the problems that need to be solved. Therefore, there might be a disconnect from, those tactical, practical skills on one side, and on the other is the more strategic thinking skills, which maybe more general in nature. So on both of those, I see a disconnect or a misalignment between the objectives and the priorities. Maybe from your experience, you've got some suggestions of how that can be more aligned.
Yeah, I agree. And schools and businesses needs to be better partners. There's no question about, and from the research stage, just taking it to the next level, I see challenges from businesses allocating enough funds to enhance the research and development, but as well as universities very often are not really up to date with market realities. So this is a part where schools and businesses needs to be more open to this relationship. And when I was trying to approach with graduate studies with some of the ideas, it was not an easy sell, although it was clear that it's benefiting every side. And then when it comes to students, even if they're interested participating in certain projects, it's not very clear outcome for them. You brought up a question about once they finish and graduate, how well they're gonna get incorporated into the businesses, and besides of the knowledge that schools brings them, it's also the work ethics, the responsibilities, many other aspects that make somebody successful later on. I see often student expectations inflated by professors and parents, or their own expectation, or their own inexperience, from salary to type of job, work ethics, and etc. And I noticed that they often end up going through hard reality, that businesses would rather consider people with experience and previous references that they can check than to take the risk by hiring students that might take months before they can contribute. So it's always the big question when I have a resume in front of from the students: do they have the right skills? Even talented students, even with the talented students, hand-holding is inevitable. In the first year, I kind of averaged out that the cost of hiring student can be almost doubled. So many companies don't find it sustainable, and they end up doing a quick turnaround of their workforce, which I always consider loss of investment. So setting that expectation has to be done starting from university, and not let them, once you graduate, you're on your own, and then there are other programs that sort of had to take it from there and bring them to reality.
Some universities and colleges, they have work co-ops or apprenticeship, or maybe industry projects that students can do in the fourth year. So in the fourth year, they might get a project from an organization and then work on that, kind of a case solving approach. So that's at least three different mechanisms that I can think of that students can gain some of that experience and realistic expectations as to what's involved. Have you maybe any other suggestions? Students could, for example, start their own companies, and some universities and colleges are moving entrepreneurship out of the classroom and into the real world. So there must be a number of different ways that we can bridge that expectation gap or that lack of ability to hit the ground running sort of thing that students and universities and businesses can work on.
Yeah, so what I noticed through the conversation with different students, and some of them went through different ways of scholarships or workshops during their studies, that the businesses don't often take them seriously. We've heard many examples when either they end up doing the job nobody else wants to do, nobody really spends the time with them. They found time wasted. Businesses sometimes get compensated partially by the time they do, or it doesn't cost them anything. So there are efforts, but I found often that it's not a healthy relationship in many cases, and I'm not sure exactly how to address that and what is the answer. Um, as I mentioned, investment is huge in the beginning. And when I look at what students can gain out of that, it's not only up to the business as well. It's also up to the students. How much of that they would like to continue investing in themselves is the really big question that I ask every student that I interview. And then when it comes to the startups, it's interesting how often they are inclined to look into, I'm going to start my own business. And I applaud that enthusiasm. It's fantastic. But there is yet another perspective of an experience that they have, that, starting your own business is also challenging. But at the same time, there are many programs and support, especially in Canada, for students coming up with their own businesses. Different programs, different incubation centers that are able to really fill these gaps. So definitely there are opportunities, but it is steep road. I mentioned in my case, I decided to consider starting business only after 10 years of experience. If I started right after my bachelor degree, it'll be very difficult to be successful.
But I'm wondering, there used to be a dilemma back in the day, whether it's still there or not, that students that started their own business, and not all startups are going to succeed, so they might need to move into employment at a large organization. Let's say the startup didn't go well. Is that not seen sometimes as a negative? Because the student the graduate now is used to doing things their own way, maybe working in a kind of an ad hoc environment where things are done very innovatively, perhaps, but not following processes and procedures. And maybe that's seen as a negative.
Clearly, the way of working in the companies is changing drastically. We see that through our customers. There is acceptance of new realities. We see impact of social networking. We see mobility being a huge driver. And interestingly, we see students bringing through the different way of how they learn and experience that they gain through the school, some innovative approach in the businesses. So that transition is happening. I would say the new generation is certainly bringing a new way of doing business. The biggest question is the business ready for that transition? So it is, I would say, difficult to estimate right now how that will work out. But the businesses who are not open for transformation will suffer down the road.
Sounds like maybe some kind of hybrid approach needs to be considered, something halfway between a bureaucratic, process-oriented approach that we sometimes see in organizations and that ad hoc, spontaneous creativity approach that we may see in startups. And maybe there's a hybrid there. But let's get back to this university and business kind of connection, because we've explored two different paths. One is on the innovation and the ideas side, and one is on the production of capable and individuals who can contribute to the organization. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's the different priorities and agendas on the two sides, on the business and the academic side. And I don't see either one of those resolving quickly. Certainly on the business side, there's more thought being given around corporate social responsibility and interacting with the community and the stakeholders and trying to have the sustainability. On the academic side, there is sometimes thought given to professors who want to just focus on the teaching or the instructing side versus the publishing of paper side, the research side. But we're still seeing a gap between the two. And I'm wondering whether you have any direct suggestions for either side. You mentioned businesses need to incorporate fresh ideas, and there's that community interaction, that outreach that they should be undertaking. But is there any specific advice that you might have, let's say for a university or college, trying to address this gap?
Yeah, so I do, and I would say kind of as a closing remarks, kind of takeaways of this, I do have a bit of message for both. I mean, from universities, they need to open doors for businesses. Idea is to allow businesses to pitch their project and ideas to students and professors. Working on up-to-date industry relevant topics is triple win for university students and business. And it is hard for universities to keep up with a rapid market change in all sectors of science if they're living in a bubble. Plus, helping students to find a job should start before their graduation. Students who are working closely with businesses will be more likely hired after graduation. So that's kind of a message for university. And when it comes to students, my message is be realistic about your expectations. In the first few years after graduation, it is more important to gain experience. And ideally with the companies that are leaders in their own space, open-minded, because the references can help you enhancing your career. And when they get opportunity, they need to continue education after the work. There is a plenty of resources online today that they can read and watch after hours and weekends. And businesses like to see that they are interested to continue investing into themselves and not just work 9 to 5 and then not think about a business until next day.
That sounds as if that when the student is interacting with a business, that they really should have a plan for personal development. The students, one of the questions that they should ask at the interview is, what kind of personal development plans are here in place? This is my current level of capability, but what am I going to be able to do, and what credentials, what experience will I have in 5 years' time after working here? And you also addressed this when you were talking about universities that take students on in some kind of internship or summer program. If the student is going into an internship and the plan is for them to do corporate filing or moving papers from part of a process, that doesn't sound like much of a personal development. So I imagine that plan aspect should really come to play in any kind of connection between students, universities, and businesses.
Exactly. And that interaction is not there. I mean, there are forms, there are sort of reviews, but very often they don't really produce the effect, and I don't see a refinement. Like even with some government programs, I'll give you an example. There is often mandate the government allocate certain budget for different programs to help students finding a job, and they try to subsidize part of the salary for a certain period of time. And I often have a dialogue with them about, when you have a certain budget, by dividing this in, let's say, 500 students and contributing, might end up doing, maybe a couple of weeks contribution. But the reality is that they might need months to get to the point that there are tangible results that business can use. So they're not very effective with the results, and often it's too short period of time. So they end up letting students go after a couple of months. And I come back and mention a couple of cases. Rather than having 500 students, do 300 and extend that period of time, because longer students are in the business, faster they will get to the point where the business can rely on them, get a roles that they fit, they will know better what to do, and that's more sustainable employment further on than what they do now. So there are improvements on both sides, but it is kind of in between universities and businesses that the government is trying to step in and kind of address some of these challenges that we talk about.
Okay, we've come to the end of our podcast today, and I want to thank you, Jovan, for talking today about what we need to do, because as you've already indicated, this is really a foundation piece of the moving into an innovative and creative economy.
Thank you, James, for having me. It was a pleasure.